Hello everyone, it's me Uncle John. Today I am going to read S4 4072. Happy birthday, Kirsten. A Springtime Story, Book 4. The American Girls Collection. Kirsten's family. A 9-year-old who moves with her family to new home on America's frontier in 1854. Papa, Lars, Mama, and Peter. Larsens sometimes long for Sweden, but they never lose heart for the challenges of pioneer life. And friends, Miss Winston, Kirsten's teacher who lives with Uncle Olaf's family, Anna and Inger, Lisbeth, and Uncle Olaf, Kirsten's American relatives, live on a new farm in Minnesota, where they make the Larson family feel at home. Chapter 1, Tornado. Hit your rock harder. Anna called to Kirsten, "Look, I can make more dust fly than you can. It makes me sneeze," Kirsten said. But she liked smacking the rag carpets that Mama and Aunt Inger had draped over the line. She grinned as she slapped the dirt out with a small branch from the maple tree. Anna held the branch with both hands because she was only 8, the youngest of the girls. She'd been given the smallest rock. The tip of her nose was as pink as a cherry blossom from the sun and the work. After the long winter, the clothes, bedding, and rugs were full of dirt and soot. But Kirsten and Anna laughed and chattered as they beat the rugs. Elizabeth called, "Hello," as she brought bed linens from the big house to where Mama and Aunt Inger were doing the laundry. They were all so glad it was warm enough to be outside. The Larsens' first winter in America had been bitterly cold, but at last the deep snows of Minnesota melted. Now May greened the farm Kirsten's family shared with Uncle Olaf and Aunt Inger. Papa, Lars, and Uncle Olaf were working the fields so they could plant wheat and corn. As soon as the seed was in the ground, the man would raise a new barn. That would be wonderful, Kirsten thought. A big new barn and a barn-raising party. But first, there was so much work to be done. Kirsten sneezed again and stopped to wipe a nose on the corner of her apron. The strong wind of the prairie whipped the skirt around her legs and pulled Anna's braids straight back from her head. It fanned the flames under the steaming laundry kettle where Mama and Aunt Inger stirred the sheets. As Peter brought the cows in to be milked, his cap blew off his head and tumbled across the barn lot. Mama scooped up the cap as it rolled to her feet, then looked at the sky in alarm. Kirsten looked too. All day the sun had shone, but now the sky was getting dark, as though night were coming early. Mama waved Kirsten to her side. She put her wet, warm hand on Kirsten's shoulder. "Those black clouds worry me," Mama said. Aunt Inger shaded her eyes to study the horizon. "Another tornado might be coming," she said. "Last spring, a tornado ripped up the woodlot and almost took that old barn. We should go into the root cellar to be safe." Even as Aunt Inger spoke, the wind blew several shingles off the roof of the little barn. "Get your brother and your cousins, Kirsten," Mama said. "Hurry!" The wind shoved Kirsten as she ran to the barn lot. "Come quickly," she called to Lisbeth and Anna. "There might be a tornado." The pine trees threshed, the tall grass flattened, and the wind howled as black clouds sped toward the farm. If a tornado touched down here, it could destroy the house and the cabin and the barn and everything in them. It could carry away the pieces of the new barn that hadn't even been put up yet. Kirsten grabbed Peter's hand. "A tornado! We have to get underground to be safe. Come to the root cellar." No one had to be told twice to hide from a tornado. Peter picked up the gray cat, Missy, and ran after Kirsten. Mama was already at the back of the big house, opening the door to the root cellar. Anna and Elizabeth scrambled in like prairie dogs into a burrow. Aunt Inger came with the lantern and the family Bible in her arms. Right behind her ran Miss Winston, the school teacher who was staying with the Larsons. She held a quilt over her head and shoulders like a cloak. Peter skidded into the root cellar with Kirsten right behind him. The Mama and Miss Winston crowded in, and Aunt Inger dragged the door shut behind her and bolted tightly. Where are Lars and Papa and Uncle Olaf? Kirsten asked. They're helping at the Peterson farm today, but don't worry. The men will lie down in a ditch if they see a funnel cloud coming. Aunt Inger said, "Here, turn over a bucket and sit down." She lit the lantern and set it by her feet. Everyone huddled together, shoulder to shoulder, in the little room dug out of the earth under the house. Last fall, the root cellar had been packed full of potatoes, turnips, carrots, beets, and apples. During the winter, the families had eaten almost all the vegetables. Now there were only a few wrinkled apples left. Aunt Inger picked them up and handed them around. "These will have to be our lunch," she said. "We can't go out until the danger is past." Aunt Inger held the family Bible in her lap. It was the most important thing the Larsons owned. Every night, Uncle Olaf or Papa read from it. In the front of the Bible, the names and important dates for everyone in the whole family were written. Kirsten liked to read her own birthday there. Kirsten Larsen, born June 8, 1844. Rud, Sweden. In a month, she would be 10 years old. Kirsten was too nervous to eat the apple Aunt Inger had given her. Outside, the wind roared and howled like a train that had brought a family across the country to their new home. What would they do if the tornado blew their cabin away? Mama was going to have a baby soon. Where would the baby be born if they didn't have a home? Kirsten pressed against Mama's side. Miss Winston pulled the quilt from her head and smoothed her hair. "In Maine, we never ever had a tornado. No one would believe me when I write home about these dangers." But she smiled to show them that a ship captain's daughter knew how to be brave. Anna touched the corner of Miss Winston's quilt. "Couldn't you find your cloak?" she asked. Anna was never too scared to be curious. "I never thought about my cloak. I just knew I had to save my quilt. So I took it and ran." Miss Winston sat up straight like a lady and smoothed the quilt in her lap. "Every time I look at my quilt, it's like getting a letter from home." "You're right to save it," Aunt Inger said. "It's beautiful." Kirsten had often seen the brightly colored quilt on Miss Winston's bed, but she had never looked at it closely. Now she leaned forward to study it. It was white and covered with designs that looked like a wreath of flowers. Each design was made from small pieces of fabric. The whole quilt was sewn with tiny, perfect stitches, the kind of stitches Mama was teaching Kirsten to make. It must have taken a long time to sew. Elizabeth said she was 12 and her sewing was already like a grown woman's. Anna shuddered when the wind huffed at the door. "Did you make your quilt, Miss Winston?" she asked in a small voice. "Oh, no. Shall I tell you how this quilt was made?" Miss Winston said. Anna nudged Kirsten's foot with hers, because Miss Winston never missed a chance to teach a lesson. "Yes, please," Anna said. "It did take a long time to sew," Miss Winston said proudly. "My mother and my aunts and cousins and my sister made this quilt for me. They gave it to me to remember them by when I left home." She pointed to the flower designs in the quilt. "The pink cloth in the center of this flower is from my sister's old apron. The cloth in this green leaf is from a dress of my mother's. The yellow cloth for the flower petals came from a dress I wore as a baby." It was hard for Kirsten to imagine Miss Winston as a baby, but she liked the quilt's lively colors. They made her think of the wild flowers in the meadow. Everyone who helped make this quilt signed their name to it. Miss Winston said, "It's a friendship quilt." Her eyes had a faraway look, as though she were gazing at her friends and family back in Maine instead of the dirt words of the damp root cellar. "Do you think you could teach us to sew a quilt?" Kirsten asked. Whenever she admired something, she wanted to do it herself. "Yes, could you?" Lisbeth echoed. Miss Winston raised her eyebrows. "Haven't I taught you sums and reading and recitation and penmanship? Of course I can teach you to make a quilt. A big one like mine would be difficult, but you could each make a small square. I have some white muslin in my trunk. I cut 3 pieces for the background." And I nudged Kirsten's foot again as the girls looked at each other excitedly. "But what can we use for making the design?" Kirsten asked. "You will need only small bits of cloth for that." Miss Winston said, "Just scraps will do." "We can use my worn-out kerchief," Anna said. "And scraps from the rag bag," Lisbeth added. "My apron can't be patched anymore." "We could cut it up for scraps," Kirsten said. Mama put her hand on Kirsten's knee. "You don't have time for fancy sewing," she said. "Remember, I need all your help to make clothes for the baby." She patted her big belly to remind Kirsten that it wouldn't be long now until they would need the baby things. Kirsten sighed. It was tiresome to hem shirts and diapers. For the baby Mama was expecting. Why did a baby need so many diapers? Surely 3 or 4 would be enough. But quilting trains the hand and eye, Miss Winston said sternly, as though Mama were one of her pupils too. "And a quilt is so practical. Mine is wonderfully warm." Mama looked doubtful. Quilting was something new to her. The Swedish women wove the blankets and bed coverings on looms. "Maybe Lisbeth and I could learn and teach you when you have time, Kirsten," Anna said. "I bet you will still be able to sew just before bedtime," Lisbeth said. "And at school we can sew during recess. I know the other girls who would like to do it too." "Sewing at recess? What a good idea," Miss Winston said. "After you walk about and take deep breaths, I'm sure there will be a little time left for sewing. Where there is a will, there is always a way." She wrapped the quilt around the shoulders again. The gray cat jumped from Peter's lap and curled around Kirsten's ankles. Missy was going to have kittens soon and didn't like to be fussed over now, but Kirsten felt comforted when she petted the cat. So she stroked Missy's soft head. "I'll sew the baby things so fast that I know I'll have some time," she told Lisbeth and Anna. "It's decided, then." Lisbeth said, "We'll learn to make a quilt." "Who knows what these girls will learn next?" Aunt Inger said to Mama. Then she cocked her head. While they had been talking, the wind had died down. "I think it might be safe to go out now," she said. "Let's look." She lifted the heavy bolt. The small door swung open onto a patch of sky as blue as one of the pieces in Miss Winston's quilt. All the rugs and covers had blown off the line, and a few shingles had blown off the rooftop. Broken branches littered the barn lot, but both houses and the old barn stood safe in the clearing among the pines. Mama let out a long sigh as though she'd been holding her breath. "Thank God that this danger had passed us by," she said. They crept out of the roof cellar like bears out of a cave into the fresh air. The end of chapter 1. This story is pretty long, so we'll cut down into each section, each chapter, okay, one by one. The end.